what a night this has been for me. I've met so many extraordinary people. I got a statement necklace and a dinner invitation from a woman I've never even met before. But I'm really honored to be here because I'm a civilian, as you all know. I'm not a medical professional of any kind. And so I'm here today as one of your patients. I was a pretty healthy kid, the kind who didn't get anything worse than an occasional temperature and the measles, of course, before we were lucky enough to have immunizations. Dr. Rubin used to come to the house with his black bag and his pack of Camels. But not often. My brothers wound up in the emergency room sometimes when they got a little wild. So my first real relationship with a doctor was when I was 19 years old and my mother had stage 4 ovarian cancer. This was back when people thought cancer was contagious, so they didn't come to the house much. If they mentioned it at all, they called it the big C. Chemo was a blunt instrument, no ports for delivery, and a basin for the inevitable throwing up next to every gurney. A gurney, yeah, because there were none of those recliner chairs either or TV sets to take your mind off of it. This happened a long time ago, almost a half century, and I wouldn't want to suggest in any way that the delivery of health care on a simple human level hasn't improved enormously. Several weeks ago, I militated for the mother of someone I knew to be admitted to hospice. And her last 3 days with those blessed hospice nurses were peaceful and warm. When my beloved sister-in-law was being treated for cervical cancer some years ago, her wonderful oncologist walked her husband, sometimes me, through everything that was being done and all that might happen. When, after 9 grueling rounds of chemo, Mary came up miraculously cancer-free, those two women, doctor and patient, hugged each other and wept for a long time. Everyone who knows me well knows that my favorite quote is from Henry James. 3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. As George said, this is incumbent on all of us, especially today, but how critical it is for the nurses, the doctors, the midwives, the physician's assistants, and others who see us at our most vulnerable, our most fearful, our most transcendent. Doctors and nurses have been there for some of the most important moments of my life. When my children were born, when my parents were dying, when my friends were struggling with illness and incapacity. I was always relieved if they were clearly adept clinicians, if they had the newest and best treatments and technology at their fingertips. But honestly, I cared most that they were kind, that they were understanding, that they modeled exactly what the Gold Foundation stands for, a human connection in the partnership that should be healthcare. Doctor and patient inevitably sounds like an unequal power dynamic. Person to person is so much more soothing for both. It's a conundrum that the better we've gotten at tackling many illnesses and conditions, the farther we've sometimes moved away from the people who actually have them. Transplanting hearts is an occasional miracle, but touching hearts can be done every day. Looking at the screen of a tablet doesn't come close to looking a person in the eye. The same technology that enables us an unprecedented look inside the human body sometimes distances healthcare professionals from the spirit within that body. That, sadly, as you know better than I do, is one of the reasons why so many healthcare professionals feel disenchanted. I'm sure some people see the goals of this organization as a clear benefit for patients, and that's true. But bringing the human touch into healthcare is a net positive for providers who are too frequently beaten down and burnt out, who feel estranged, from those principles that brought them to the work in the first place. Warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug, reads one version of the Hippocratic Oath. But over the years, the words of that oath may grow distant, and the mission, less people, more paper. But the simple truth is, charts don't love you back. I remember an event at which an older doctor told me that when he was leading medical students on rounds, one asked him afterwards why he had bothered to manually take the pulse of a patient they had seen. After all, weren't the patient's vitals reflected maybe better than the doctor's fingers on a wrist could ever do on that electronic screen on one side of the bed? And it's important, the veteran told the neophytes, not just to look at that, but to lay hands on the people we treat, to touch them. But of course, he meant a lot more than taking a pulse. He was warning young physicians not to lose touch with the humanity of their patients, that they were treating a person, not a condition. Touchy-feely, he said one of his colleagues once said disdainfully of what he was doing, and he replied, exactly. Now, I know many of you must feel under fire these days. There's so much criticism of American healthcare, everything from delays in appointments to insurance reimbursement. All of my friends complain all the time. They hate the healthcare system, but they love their nurses and doctors. That's the bottom line. We often feel as though you hold our lives in your hands, and we don't want to feel like you're doing that at arm's length. The lack of that human connection is not only tainting the delivery of health care in this country, it is poisoning everything. It is what has poisoned our culture, our community, and our national character. The very worst things done in this nation are done out of an unwillingness to recognize and acknowledge our shared humanity. Homophobia, sexism, racism, religious bigotry, xenophobia, they all arise out of an essential disconnect that causes us to turn others into merely constructs, and it diminishes the lives of all of us when that happens. Let me tell you a little bit about the doctor who treated my mother all those years ago. Everyone said he was a crack clinician, so I guess he was, but he had the bedside manner of a manila envelope. I was hanging out with a woman who weighed 85 pounds and was wearing dresses. I was running up on my Singer sewing machine with a maternity pattern because her abdominal edema was so bad and so persistent. And one day he turned to me as he was leaving the room and said, "You know, we think this is genetic." I looked down at my mother and I saw the future spread before me. Let me tell you about the last time I saw him, because I think it illustrates perfectly the chasm between who healthcare providers sometimes are, and not only what they ought to be, but what they wish they were. We too were in a Catholic church. I was walking behind a coffin. He was standing in the last pew. I suspect, given his specialty, that he did not go to many or even any of the funerals of his other patients, so perhaps my mother, who was very young and very good-natured, had touched him in some special way. If that was so, he had never once indicated it in the many times he had seen her in the hospital. I only suspected it because looking over that curve of polished wood, past the bronze crucifix and the nameplate, I thought I saw the sheen of tears in his eyes. Ah, but patients want caring when they are still alive to feel it. I don't despair of that happening. As I said the last time I spoke before this group, I contrast the end of my mother's life to the end of my father's 4 decades later. The social worker stopped by the hospital room each day to ask how I was doing. One of the nurses offered to play music when I wasn't around, when she saw me doing the same during visiting hours. One of the doctors came to discuss with me switching to palliative care. 3 times, he put a hand on my arm and said, "I know this is difficult." And 2 weeks after my father died, the staff sent me a personally signed sympathy card. My father had excellent clinical care, but those are the things I will remember. There is no technology, no tests or treatments, no surgeon's knife or chemist's drug, in the words of the oath, that can take the place of that kind of simple humanity. I am so honored to be here tonight for the Gold Foundation, which not only believes that, but that lives the truth of it through everything it does for patients and for healthcare professionals as well. Thank you very much.